The show is about well, it's hopefully it's just a sitcom, but to the extent that it's about people, it's about studying the way that people like interact in communities. Like, what does that mean? Somebody's got to be the shoemaker. Somebody's got to cut the hair. What do you do with your criminals? Is there such a thing as good and evil and all this stuff? And everyone has their little role. And Jeff's unfortunate role is the role of leader, which everybody needs.
For the first part, I'm going to talk about Community. Not the TV show, but the community of characters and how they relate to one another. This idea is also referred to a lot as character webbing. It is critical that you think of your characters as a web, and not as different isolated units that only happen to exist within the same universe. I've seen this many times in stories and movies. Some of the worst advice I've seen for character development is that you simply create a character profile for each one of your characters and list as much about that character as you possibly can. And also design your characters so they're as different as possible from one another. This is wrong because the strategy inherently sets up your characters to be independent units rather than a community. What you end up with is just a random collection of characters that have nothing to do with one another and just stand alone by themselves.
Think that the way that you get an audience to care about a character is you make that character as detailed as possible, meaning we give them as many character traits as we can. This is not the best way to go, because those tend to be very superficial elements of a person. And that's not what makes an audience care about a character.
Remember that characters in your story are people, and people are intrinsically social. The connections and relationships characters have with others is stronger than developing the characters on their own. This is because comparisons made, showing what a character isn't, is better than simply saying what the character is. But this is so far just a bunch of talk. How do you develop characters using a character web? The best way is this. Think about either the theme or the moral argument of your story. Then have your characters each exist on a tangent to the theme or moral argument. To elaborate, the theme is a central topic, which the story is about in a very generic sense, and usually can be stated in 3 words or less. The moral argument is the lesson that the story teaches us. For example, the theme of Star Wars is the coming of age. It is about a boy named Luke that learns what it takes to become a man in his universe. The moral argument is anyone has what it takes to be great. Notice that this applies to both Luke and Han. 12 Angry Men has themes about the danger of ignorance, or the consequences of prejudice. In the film, the jury debates sentencing a young man to the death penalty, despite the facts not being completely clear to them. Many of the jurors are convinced that the young man is guilty due to their own prejudice. The lesson learned here is that you should not condemn someone based on your prejudice against them.
They're real big drinkers, all of them. You know that. And bang, someone's lying in the gutter. Well, nobody's blaming them for it. That's the way they are, by nature. You know what I mean? Violent. Where are you going? Human life don't mean as much to them as it does to us. Look, they're lushing it up and fighting all the time. And if somebody gets killed, so somebody gets killed, they don't care.
And Ted is themed with the persistence of friendship. No matter what happens between them, John and Ted remain friends throughout. And the moral argument is, the price of a relationship shouldn't be the cost of your best friend.
Brianna, Amber, Sabrina, Melody, Dakota, Sierra, Bambi, Crystal, Samantha, Autumn, Ruby, Taylor, Tara, Tammy, Lauren, Charlene, Chantel, Courtney, Misty, Jenny, Krista, Mindy, Noelle, Shelby, Trina, Reba, Cassandra, Nikki, Kelsey, Shauna, Jolene, Erling, Claudine, Savannah, Casey, Dolly, Kendra, Kylie, Chloe, Devin, Emily, fucking Becky?
Nope.
Wait, was it any one of those names with a Lynn after it?
Yes.
Oh, I got you, motherfucker. I got you. Okay. Brady Lynn, Heather Lynn,
Tammy Lynn.
Fuck!
So those were some examples of theme and moral argument. Now that those are established, the characters should then be interconnected by each holding their own perspective of the theme or moral argument. Community is a show about the theme of community, and each character in the show surrounds this theme, in the sense that each one of them would much rather have each other than to ever be apart.
You know what's really cool about this is that he's not just some dick. Like every single character on that show, the one thing they have in common is that they'd rather be with each other than be alone.
Now I'll show you what happens when you apply the character web principle, and what happens when you don't. The category I'll use here is Disney Animated Classics. A good example of a strong character web is through Aladdin. The theme of the movie is prison. Each of the three main characters experience their own sense of being trapped or imprisoned in their own reality. Aladdin is trapped in poverty and stuck in a perpetual state of scraping for food and escaping from guards. Jasmine is trapped in her castle and is forced to marry a prince to take care of her before her father passes. Genie is trapped literally in a lamp that holds him captive and is forced to serve those who discover his lamp. Now imagine if Aladdin was the only one who was trapped, and Jasmine was just a love interest, and Genie was just a comic relief. Then the characters would be forced to stand on their own, and they in turn would be much weaker. But because we see how each character experiences and reacts to the same problem, we receive a stronger sense of what these characters are like. For example, a trait of Jasmine is that she is proactive and not afraid to take risks, but this trait is enhanced greatly when you see her proactively escape her own prison. Compare her action to the lack of action by Aladdin or Genie. Aladdin escapes his prison driven by his love for Jasmine. Genie escapes his prison driven by his desire to help Aladdin. Jasmine escapes her prison by her own independent drive. Jasmine's escape is the only one that occurs by her own will for nothing else but to be free. Through the comparisons of these characters and defining what drives them to their goals, the traits at which they differ are strengthened. So that's what happens when a strong character web is woven into your story. But how do your characters feel if a character web is not applied? You get the Black Cauldron. The theme for the Black Cauldron is another example of the coming of age, where our main character Taran dreams of being a great hero, but he learns that a true hero is one that sacrifices. This movie is decent, but the development of the characters followed the bad advice I mentioned earlier, that to create good characters, you must make long, detailed lists of each character and make them as different as possible. This is a bad idea, as I mentioned, because it inherently sets up your characters as independent units rather than a connected community. So let's see what we have as far as characters. There's Taran, who is a pig keeper, a princess who has a golden snitch follower around, an old man who is just a second-rate musician, then a comic relief that just looks like a mini Chewbacca. The problem with the Black Cauldron is that these characters share no connections with the other characters based on the theme or the moral argument of the story. In fact, the only thing that they have in common is that they just happen to be in the same location and at the same time. Only Taran experiences the coming of age theme through the story. What happens is that you just have a collection of 4 characters that are independently developed, so they are forced to stand on their own. This results in weaker characters because they are only determined by who they are. There is no definition in who they are not. The consensus on Rotten Tomatoes states specifically that the Black Cauldron lacks the compelling characters of other Disney classics. It just goes to show that just because your characters are as different as possible doesn't automatically mean you'll have a group of lovable misfits.
It's a list of everything that movies have taught me comprises a successful first year at college.
Bond with a group of lovable misfits.
Now let's apply this concept to your story. As I mentioned before, don't expect this to only take an hour or even an afternoon. Good characters won't just flow from your mind on its own. First, consider what the theme and the moral argument is of your story. Actually write this down. The theme should be less than 3 words. Then create your hero. Think about what their approach is to the theme or the moral argument. What actions do they do that support this? Think about the hero's change from the beginning to end and how his change relates to this. After your hero, think of your next character, the enemy, the ally, the romantic interest, and so on. Consider each of these characters and what their perspective is on the theme or the moral argument. Make each one different. Think about why each one of them has this perspective. What makes your characters feel the way that they feel? If 2 characters feel the same way about the theme or moral argument, think about the past and the future. How do these characters react to having the same feeling? How do these characters differ in the way that they reach this feeling? Especially give this thinking to your antagonist. Your antagonist should perceive the theme or moral argument differently than your protagonist.